This is CBC Vancouver News.
It's a tough balance to find a way for us to stay in business, be profitable, because we also want our customers to be profitable.
Your next cup of coffee may soon cost you more. What U.S. President Trump's proposed tariffs could mean for coffee importers in Canada and the price you pay. Also,
in this crisis, do we want to meekly accept what the Americans want?
I will cut the federal government's budget for consultants by $10 billion.
You shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. You shouldn't put all your power in one party.
with the debates behind them and advance voting in full swing, what should voters expect from the federal parties in the final stretch of the campaign? Plus,
and I think we all need a little bit of extra hope right now.
How people across Vancouver are marking Easter amid global conflicts and tensions. Hello, I'm Janella Hamilton. Thanks for joining us. With more U.S. tariffs brewing, BC's coffee industry is bracing for potential impacts. Canada is a major coffee importer, and as Saurabh Sandhu reports, it could mean you may soon be paying more for your cup of joe.
Matt Johnson runs a small-scale coffee roastery at this cafe in Vancouver.
It's sort of a hybrid space where it's a roastery, it's also a cafe. We also ship out from our online store from this location.
Johnson gets his coffee from a network of Canadian importers who buy directly from producers in South American countries. But with the threat of American tariffs, that arrangement could be impacted.
The producers who are exporting their coffee from like Colombia or Brazil are going to have a hard time selling their coffee at prices that they need to sell it at in the U.S.
Experts say the uncertainty over tariffs could not have come at a worse time for the industry, as droughts in the world's largest coffee producers, Brazil and Vietnam, have doubled the price of raw coffee beans since last year.
It's just not good for an industry where we've seen increased record price for the green bean. We don't grow coffee in Canada.
Now, several other coffee-producing countries have been targeted with reciprocal tariffs by American President Donald Trump, which Carter says could be bad news for Canadian business owners. He says the move could be particularly challenging for the Canadian specialty coffee importing sector, which relies on their supply to come through the U.S.
It can't support the volumes or even like the logistical wants and needs of all these little micro roasters across the country. So often what roasters like us will do is use U.S. importers.
Another local coffee roaster says the impacts of tariffs would most likely result in increasing costs for consumers.
We have to eat some of the cost, and when we can, we will pass that on to our cafes and wholesale customers. But we also know that they can only raise their prices so much.
Everybody has to decide for themselves what brings them joy, what are the little luxuries that they want to carry forward with them through a time that ultimately is going to be pretty tumultuous for this country.
Perry says for now, specialty coffee is still reasonably priced in Canada, but that could change if the trade war continues. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
With the tariffs putting pressure on BC's economy, some cannabis producers say the province is ignoring a homegrown solution. A group of growers gathered in Victoria this weekend for the annual 420 celebration, urging the province to see cannabis as a driver of economic growth and tourism.
There's a perception that cannabis tourism has to include consumption to some degree, whether you're inhaling or whether it's an edible or whether it's a beverage. That's not necessarily the case. Maybe you might be interested in learning how cannabis grows or going to a farm.
The BC Craft Farmers Co-op is calling for policy changes, including lower licensing fees and tax benefits for growers. The province says cannabis is now included in tourism and agriculture mandates, and it's working with Ottawa on reforms to support local producers. A popular golf course in Point Roberts, Washington, has been caught in the middle of the trade war between Canada and the U.S., but the general manager says she was pleasantly surprised to see an influx of Canadian golfers during its reopening this weekend. It comes as a growing number of Canadians call off travel plans to the States.
Parking lot full of Canadian plates, so that was a really good thing to see. Everybody had smiles on their faces. They were happy that we were reopened. And as the local sheriff said to me, there's no tariffs on golf. So that's our hashtag out there on our social media, on Instagram. And I think people really respect it.
Evans says the turnout has had a positive impact on other businesses in Point Roberts. She believes many Canadians understand the border town's unique situation and says the golf course aims to be a non-political space for guests to enjoy the game. The federal election is entering its final stretch with main party leaders back out campaigning across the country. Today, Mark Carney addressed a rally in the Ottawa area riding where he's running, aiming to fire up his backers with a mix of patriotism and criticism of both Pierre Poilievre and Donald Trump.
In this crisis, do we want to meekly accept what the Americans want? Or do we want to stand up for ourselves and for each other?
Carney's next stop on the campaign is Atlantic Canada, where polls suggest the Liberals hold a commanding lead. Here in BC, Pierre Poilievre was in Surrey campaigning on government spending and household affordability. And he announced another planned cut he says will save taxpayers money, targeting government consultants.
I will cut the federal government's budget for consultants by $10 billion, bringing it back to the level it was under Stephen Harper.
Poilievre used a grocery store to highlight the affordability issue and to recap the policies he's already announced on it. The Conservatives' costed platform is set to be released shortly. Meanwhile, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was in Victoria talking about the rising cost of groceries. He argues again that neither the Conservatives nor the Liberals had lower and middle income struggles high on their agendas.
You shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. You shouldn't put all your power in one party. And we know that that's just how our country has worked best. All the great things in our country have happened when one party doesn't have all the power, and particularly at the same time when New Democrats are strong.
Singh has promised a series of measures on grocery affordability, including price caps and more power for the Competition Bureau to combat price fixing. For the most part, Canada's federal election campaign has been dominated by one issue: tariffs. But as Renee Lucas reports, some 2S LGBTQ+ voters in Vancouver say they feel sidelined with their concerns missing from the conversation.
The West End is the hub of Vancouver's 2S LGBTQ+ community. Advocates say anti-queer and trans rhetoric south of the border has brought anxiety to many who live here as Canada's federal election approaches.
I think one of the most difficult things for our community right now is we're seeing a massive rollback in the rights of queer and trans people, and it's terrifying. It's really scary. The result of that is an increase in discrimination, an increase in violence, an increase in harm directed towards queer and trans people, particularly in smaller communities across BC.
We look south of the border and we see President Donald Trump undertaking an existential assault on the freedom and liberty and recognition of transgender Americans.
In response, Johnstone has launched Canada-wide ad campaigns encouraging Canadians to vote for freedom, equality, and human rights.
We're not telling folks who to vote for, but just to keep those values in mind at the voting booth.
Queer Momentum's Drag the Vote billboard campaign has 250 drag artists from across the country acting as ambassadors, urging the queer community and allies to vote.
I'm just so confused and just frustrated in 2025 that this is the kind of fight that we have to have.
Jaylene Time is a two-spirit trans woman and Vancouver drag legend, using her time on Canada's Drag Race to raise awareness about the 60s scoop. She says a lot of young trans people are afraid right now, But she wants them to know they're not alone.
That's why we're really jumping out in full force and being really visible, is because you want to let people know that we've been through this before and we will come together and we will fight for what's right.
Roback says this is a moment of crisis and politicians need to double down on the protection of rights for 2S LGBTQ+ people.
I think people within the queer and trans community are very motivated to vote, but I'm scared that it's not enough. And I think that this is one of those moments where we really need our allies.
Renee Lucas, CBC News, Vancouver.
Northshore Rescue is reminding people who venture into the mountains about icy conditions in the backcountry. The warning comes after a 28-year-old hiker died Saturday when she reportedly slipped and fell off a cliff at Mount Seymour while trying to retrieve her cell phone. A similar situation last weekend when a skier tried to retrieve a runaway ski, tumbling a significant distance down the side of a mountain at Cypress Ski Resort.
The snow slopes are frozen solid and like boilerplate steel. And if you slip and fall on that without micro spikes or crampons or a way to stop yourself, you can accelerate as if you're jumping out of an airplane. It is just so quick.
He says last weekend, crews responded to multiple calls for people seriously injured after slipping and falling on North Shore mountains. He is urging anyone who goes into the wilderness this time of year to be prepared with the right equipment and to be aware of your surroundings. Well, thousands visit North Shore Mountains every year, but as we know, some of those trips don't go according to plan. Georgie Smythe has more on how local search and rescue teams are using cutting-edge technology to find those who get lost faster than ever.
All right, let's go find them.
In Vancouver's steep, lush and rain-soaked mountains, more than 100 people get lost every year.
Oh, got them already.
But emerging technology is making it easier to find them.
Now do you see them? It's pretty wild, hey?
This is the view from a Northshore Rescue drone. Equipped with thermal imaging software, it picks up a person's heat print, even in dense trees.
This is our thermal drone. It actually has 3 cameras, so the thermal imaging camera.
It's a game changer for Canada's busiest volunteer search and rescue team, already saving a lost hiker in the mountains late last year.
And it was on my last battery after we had a very faint call out in a direction that I actually spotted the subject. He had fallen in some creeks. It was about -6, so if the team hadn't found him that night, I think it would have been more of a recovery.
The functionality of the drones has been in development for months, but they can now be deployed beside the team's helicopters and ground crew.
So of course this could fit in my backpack.
And it could soon include support from artificial technology.
Okay, so we have a detection in the corner of the screen there.
This drone is fitted with AI software developed in Squamish that can detect bright colors or movement in a landscape, anything that doesn't belong that could help find a missing person.
Like a color through a tree canopy or some bit of motion. And the operator is really looking for anomalies. And so our computer vision system is basically doing the same.
Visual recognition software Northshore Rescue says it may start to use in a few months.
So the message would be, don't wear green and brown?
Don't wear green and brown. Wear bright colors.
And of course, tell others where you're going and when you'll be back. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, North Vancouver.
People across the globe are marking Easter this weekend, and as Michelle Gomez reports, for some in Vancouver, the holiday symbolizes hope and new beginnings amid global conflicts and tensions.
Smiles and hugs are abundant at the Canadian Memorial United Church in Vancouver on Sunday. Hundreds of churchgoers attended service to celebrate Easter, which marks the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Easter is, again, a Christian festival, but it's a universal story of love and hope and how those things are stronger than fear and death.
Just as much as Easter is about religion, Rock says the holiday is also about community, hope, and new beginnings, something he says many are in need of.
There's some difficult things in our world happening right now in the political situation here in Canada, as we're facing a federal election, in global geopolitics, tariffs, rising cost of living, a housing crisis, a toxic drug crisis. And I think we all need a little bit of extra hope right now.
At the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Classical Garden in Chinatown, children were invited to enjoy the beauty of nature and hunt for Easter eggs.
And we look into that intersection between classical Chinese culture and Western holidays. So it's a nice fusion and then dialogue in that way. So we welcome people of all backgrounds to join us.
Who finished hunting? Hands up.
Elsewhere, lettuce and herbs were on the menu for Easter dinner.
Spin. Good job. You spin. Good girl.
Some Vancouverites hopped over to the Bunny Cafe for some Easter cheer. The cafe has 13 resident bunnies, all rescued by nonprofit Rabbitats.
They're all rescue bunnies, so bunnies who've been abandoned, bunnies who've been surrendered, people can't take care of them anymore. A lot of them just kind of get dumped.
Trite says there are so many domestic bunnies abandoned around Metro Vancouver that rescue organizations can't keep up with them. She says it's important for those getting a pet to do research and be prepared. Wishing everyone a very hoppy Easter weekend, however you may be celebrating. Michelle Gomez and Periwinkle the Bunny, CBC News, Vancouver.
Still ahead, for the first time in almost a decade, 5 Canadian teams are in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and hopes are high one of those teams will finally bring the cup back to Canada. That's next. Stay with us. In the last lap of the federal election campaign, polls are suggesting the Liberals have a strong appeal among women aged 55 and older. Nicole Williams spoke with some of them to find out why.
These women are getting into the groove, concentrating on next steps in more ways than one.
I'm overwhelmed about the many elections that's going on and the many changes and the threats coming from the southern border.
The Canadian economy and our relationship with the U.S. are top of mind for women over 55 this federal election, and many believe Liberal leader Mark Carney is the man to fix it.
He seems calm and he's intelligent, obviously, but also just, he doesn't put up with stuff.
Data shows the majority of women 55 and up in this country are backing the Liberals. According to Angus Reid, more than 50%.
What are the policies that recent Liberal leaders or Liberal governments have enacted? And I think, again, of the provision of free contraceptives. I think, again, of childcare.
That's compared to just over 30% for the Progressive Conservatives.
At one point, Conservatives were a viable option, and now they've gone right-wing. Like, they're polarized, they're working on division.
But even with the recent threats of annexation coming from U.S. President Donald Trump, mature women leaning Liberal isn't necessarily new.
That goes back to the ascent of Justin Trudeau back in 2013, 2014 when he took over as leader.
And while some became disenchanted with Trudeau by the end of his leadership, Mark Carney has managed to renew enthusiasm.
I think that that Carney is the best guy to build Canada up to be its own sovereign nation.
The desire for change in government is still a factor, and some of the women I spoke to say they're planning to vote Conservative with that end in mind. Others suggesting none of the parties are worth voting for at all. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Stanley Cup returning to Canada. It's been a dream for a long time and an elusive one. But with 5 Canadian teams in the playoffs this year, the dream is much more vivid. Sam Sampson reports.
And so the Battle of Ontario begins for the first time in 21 years. The Toronto Maple Leafs and the Ottawa Senators are fighting to move past the first round of the NHL playoffs, rivals with history.
These teams were meeting repeatedly in the playoffs, and it was kind of nasty. In the end, it was one-way traffic. Toronto just won time after time after time, and we're breaking the Senator fans' hearts.
But now Ottawa fans are ready for a comeback.
Leafs have been there, done that. I feel like we have so much gas in the tank.
There's also a national score to settle. With 5 Canadian teams in the playoffs for the first time since 2017, there's a chance to break Canada's 32-year Stanley Cup drought.
The Canadians win the Stanley Cup!
The Montreal Canadiens were the last to hoist the trophy back in 1993. This year, they just clinched a playoff spot in their last game of the regular season.
The Canadians are the Cinderella story. The slipper, I don't think, is going to fit the foot, unfortunately. And if there's one thing we know, you just never count Montreal out.
Winnipeggers ask the same for their Jets.
Everybody doubts us. They don't believe in such a little small town. But you know what? We are the best.
History is not on their side. It's been more than a decade since the best regular season team also won the Cup.
I've never been to Vegas and I'm not a shark, but I know that odds reset every year. And when you enter the NHL playoffs, the teams are so competitive, you have a 1 in 16 chance of winning the Stanley Cup.
That's the hope in Edmonton, where signs of playoff hockey are in full bloom. After last year's loss in the final, the Oilers are bringing hope for redemption and more business to Alberta's capital city.
Our last playoff season was super busy. People have been talking about it all year, so now we're excited to just bring that back and see a nice cup run for the boys.
A sentiment heard around the country as 5 cities hope spring hockey lasts into summer. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Edmonton.
Here we have a live shot of White Rock Pier tonight on a relatively clear night. I'll have your full forecast coming up next.
I think it's important to give a human face to the stories that we hear every day, the people that they affect. And I think talking to those people is what really gives us the true sense of the impact of the stories that we're hearing.
All right, it is time now to take a look at our weather for the week ahead. Let's begin with a quick peek at the current temperatures around the province tonight. -1 in Fort St. John and -1 in Williams Lake as well. Similar conditions. Rainier in Kelowna and Kamloops with a low of 2 overnight, and on the island 5 in Victoria. Heading into the tomorrow cast, lots of sun across the board, a high of 11 for Fort St. John with nice and sunny conditions. Same with both Prince George and Williams Lake, similar conditions. It's going to be a little snowier in Golden with a high of 10 and a little rainier with some light rain in Cranbrook for tomorrow and a high of 11 on the island. Nice and clear and sunny with a high of 13 in Victoria and 12 in Tofino. Our Easter Monday is looking about a 12 for tomorrow with a mix of sun and clouds, and it looks like it's going to be rather dry for the remainder of the week with a 40% chance of some showers returning on Friday. That is your late news for this Sunday. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. To keep up to date with all the latest news, visit our website at cbc.ca/bc. Happy Easter.